My name is Jamie Boskett. I'm the president and CEO of the Virginia Museum of History and Culture and also a member of the executive committee of Virginia 250 and one of the co-conspirators of helping to plan this wonderful summit. So thank you for being a part of it. And today I'm joined by some wonderful colleagues, and we're going to take you on a very quick but very high-level journey as it relates to funding for the 250th. As you might imagine, I'm looking out with a lot of familiar faces. There are many different sizes and types of organizations. There are state agencies, planning commissions, history museums, you name it. These are apples and oranges, and everything is going to have to be customized. That's just the reality with fundraising. So we're not going to probably give you the ultimate perfect answer to help with your work for raising the money needed to pull off what you aspire to do for the 250th. My hope is that in the next few minutes, we can offer you at different layers, different levels, of various insights and maybe a few tips and tricks to keep in mind. But what you'll see here today is a panel assembled to cover some different ground, funding from the federal level, funding at the state and local level, and conversation briefly about corporate and private support. So we're going to try to run through that gamut, save some time for questions at the end, and then, of course, I know all of our panelists who are with us throughout the summit would love to continue the conversation after the fact. So brief introductions, and I'm going to sit down while I do this, and we're going to, we're roughly in order. This is very well rehearsed, very good. I'm joined today by Christine Pellerin, who is from the Normandy Group based in Washington, D.C., and she is here in part to join our friend Rob Krett, who's the CEO of the Connecticut Museum of Culture and History, in some conversation and success, in fact, that they've had recently with securing federal funding and support. And they're going to give us a sense of the landscape and some, some observations, let's say, for what we can look forward to in the next few years as it relates to the 250th. Also here in the center with the red is Cassandra Coleman, who's the executive director at America 250 PA. And she has done a wonderful job of rallying state support to provide for what the wonderful Commonwealth of Pennsylvania is doing for the 250th. And so she'll talk a little about that. And I think also because of her success in the more grassroots level in local communities and activation, perhaps give us a few ideas and suggestions on that front. And closest to me, to my right, is Todd Gross, who is the president and CEO of the Georgia Historical Society. And the Georgia Historical Society, like the Virginia Museum of History and Culture, is a long-standing private nonprofit organization, and we pride ourselves on building a lot of corporate relationships and securing private philanthropy, and Todd is one of the best. So he'll offer a few words of advice on that front. So without further ado, I think we'll hear from our panelists, and I'm going to start Rob and Christine with the two of you, and we'll do just, again, a couple of quick questions for each of these general categories of federal, state, and private support. So why don't you kick us off and just give us a sense of the landscape of federal funding as it relates to the 250th. And be candid, because I think this isn't, again, I think these are, we need to be aware of what's available or not and what our next steps are. So Rob?
Great. Thank you very much. I want to thank everybody for joining us this afternoon, and of course, thank our hosts here in Williamsburg. This afternoon, I'll make a few comments about possible public funding from state governments, from federal, our experience in Connecticut, and maybe a few other comments as well. Then I'll turn things over to Christine here to my right, who will provide more detail about potential federal funding and, frankly, how you can help. I was fortunate to attend this gathering last year, and frankly, I was inspired. I hope that those of you that were here last year felt the same way, and those of you that are with us today also feel very inspired about the possibilities of the 250th. It made me think a bit more about the bicentennial in 1976, and you may recall, it was mentioned a little bit earlier, that CBS hosted the Bicentennial Minute. Every night at 9 o'clock for about 2 years, there was a little excerpted history fact about the bicentennial. Now, my personal bicentennial minute was when I was 14 years old, and I was a coxswain competing in a rowing regatta on the Schuylkill River in Philadelphia as part of their bicentennial celebration. But through crew, I've learned the importance of getting the right people in the right seat in the boat and getting them to row in the same direction toward the same goal. And that's really exactly what we're talking about here in terms of state and federal funding for the 250th. As was mentioned, I've been working with Christine and her team from the Normandy Group to secure federal funding for my organization for about 3 years now. And together, we've been able to secure 3 $1 million earmarks for the Connecticut Museum. So last April, following my experience here in Williamsburg, we started to explore the possibility of federal funding for organizations like mine for America 250 projects. We spoke with dozens of people involved with the America 250 Commission, the congressional staffers for the America 250 Caucus. We spoke with people at the American Association of Museums. I guess they have a different name, right? The American Alliance of Museums, the National Endowment for the Humanities, the IMLS, the National Archives, just to name a few. And we quickly learned that our message needed to include a national voice and not just mine from a local institution. Christine and I had conversations with John Dichtel at the AASLH. And for those of you that don't know that organization, it's the American Association for State and Local History. And I'm grateful that he saw the importance of trying to secure federal funding for America 250 projects across the country. And the three of us have been working together for the past few months. So if you represent a history organization and are not a member of the AASLH, you need to join. And if you're a member, consider increasing to a higher level of membership. John and his team are doing an excellent job, and he needs all of our support. So through John, I've learned that there are over 21,000 history organizations across the country, and 30 to 40% of those organizations were formed in and around the bicentennial. Now, if that's one of the legacies of the bicentennial, John challenged us to think about the legacy of the 250th. My hope is that the lasting legacy may be more federal and state funding for the cultural sector, more collaborations among cultural organizations, and more meaningful partnerships between museums, libraries, and organizations like public broadcasting and the tourism industry. We have a once-in-a-generation opportunity, and we have a choice to make. We can certainly make do with what we have and shuffle our budgets around and provide programming for America 250, or we can play some offense. And we can think bigger and make a more meaningful impact on the communities we serve, and more importantly, to serve new audiences. In Connecticut, that state commission will not do any direct programming, but is encouraging organizations to do so with 4 overarching themes: telling inclusive stories or whole history, the power of place, doing history, and for the common good or civics education. Now, to do anything big in these areas, we need additional funding. In terms of state funding, we have information in hand from more than 25 states that has been kept up to date by the AASLH for America 250 projects. Funding from these different states range from $0 to tens of thousands to tens of millions of dollars. And I've used that data with our state legislatures, and there's a bill pending in the Connecticut State House that would provide $30 million over 5 years for arts, culture, and tourism with America 250 at the center. And I just want to give a shout out to my colleagues at the Connecticut Humanities that are here as well. They're an important partner in this effort with Jason, Scott, and Cindy. Now, in terms of federal funding, one of the things that I really want this group to understand is that the current House leadership has banned museums from congressionally directed spending requests. Banned museums from earmarks. Now, that's something that happened in fiscal year 2024 and is still in play today. So in order for any museum to apply for a federal earmark, you have to go through the Senate. So if you didn't know that or weren't aware with that, I wanted you to be. Now, considering that and the current fiscal and political environment we're operating in, it will take all of us to make a difference and having Congress prioritize funding for agencies that fund local institutions like ours to carry out programming connecting our communities to history and preserving democracy that will yield stronger civic engagement for future generations. We're moving forward with a strategy to secure federal funding through the architecture that already exists, and we are asking for additional funding through 6 entities: the America 250 Commission, the Institute for Museum and Library Services, the National Endowment for the Humanities, the National Park Service, the National Endowment for the Arts, and the NHPRC, the National Historical Publications and Records Commission. And for more details about that strategy, I am happy to turn it over to my colleague, Christine.
Thank you so much, Rob. It's such a pleasure to be here. I'm the layperson here. You guys are all the experts in your sector and your field, and I am so inspired by all of the stories that I'm hearing, and Congress needs to hear it. Our strategy here is not just for the America 250 commemoration on July 4th, 2026. It's for generations after that. The agencies that Rob just mentioned have been here long before America 250 and will survive long after. However, their funding levels are not at the robust levels that need to go to all of you, state and local entities on the ground where the rubber meets the road and can turn around some of the very troubling trends that we heard from Justice Thomas earlier today. So our approach is twofold. It's a public-facing approach and then a behind-the-scenes approach, kind of ripping a page out of our firm's experience in the appropriations sector. Our firm, the Normandy Group, is a very small government relations firm, but it is our appropriations practice is the heart and soul of our firm. One of our principal members is former Congressman Henry Bonilla, who spent 14 years in the House of Representatives, all 14 of those years on the Appropriations Committee. He was the first Republican Hispanic from the state of Texas to be awarded a position in his freshman year on the committee, and I had the great privilege of staffing him on his Labor, Health and Human Services and Education Appropriations Committee, and then the great fortune of hiring him at our firm years ago, and we've been a partner ever since on these endeavors. For 30 years, we've represented entities like the National Association of Community Health Centers. There are 12,000 health centers almost in every congressional district. Guess what? There's 21,000 of you. There's 17,000 libraries, something like 16,000 archives. There's 60,000 of you, and if we could mobilize and really give Congress the idea of how important these programs are to fund and that you guys are great stewards of the funding, I think we'll make a huge impact. So think of our strategy as beyond just this commemoration, but for the long haul. We want to change the trajectory of these programs. So the public-facing approach, again, is ripped out of a page book that we've been successful at with the health centers and the TRIO program, which is a national education program that provides helps underprivileged first-generation students go to college and stay in college. And what we've done over the years is organize a letter in both the House and the Senate to have as many members of Congress sign on to it, very conservative, very liberal members. And you have to word the letter very carefully in order to attract both those both sides of the aisle in that regard. And so we do have a letter that's pending now with a number of members of Congress, both Republican and Democrats in both chambers. We haven't gotten firm confirmation on leads to that letter yet, and that's largely because the FY24 process is not done. We expect that to be done on Friday. We hope that they'll turn their attention to FY25. In this letter, it talks about, again, some of the troubling trends, that 8th graders are testing a full 30 points below. They did on the national report card in history and civics below where they were the last time they were tested. Only 1 in 3 Americans can pass the citizenship test. And generationally, from the boomers with a very high pride in America down to Gen Z with only 16% pride in our country. This moment in time provides us an opportunity to raise attention, make sure Congress break through the noise, make sure Congress is aware we have less than 2 years to make a difference. The FY25 process is the last real opportunity in advance of this commemoration. to get funding through this. Now, our approach is much longer than that. We want to boost IMLS funding, boost NEH, NEA, and for years to come to enable all of you to be more able to compete for those funding. So think of that as the long term. So the public-facing effort is to get, in the case of the health centers, we've been able to get 260 members of Congress on the House side to sign on the letter, 70 members in the Senate. 70 members of the Senate agreeing to anything is incredible. On TRIO, 190 members of the House signing on, 50 members of the Senate signing on. We're hopeful that we can reach those numbers once this letter is circulating, but we're going to need your help. The behind the scenes effort is our firm, even though we're small, we're collecting 535 application from each of the members of Congress and filling them out for all 6 of these programs and submitting them on behalf of the American Association of State and Local History and asking for a plus up in those accounts. In this environment, that's going to be really tough, but this anniversary provides us an opportunity to raise the noise on all of this. And so we're going to make incremental, I think, advances in this regard, and we hope that you will all be the beneficiaries of that work in the years to come.
So, Christine, I think let's be really specific. What could the people in this room do to help with that initiative?
Well, we're going to have to be a little bit, we'll have to work with the organizers of this event. Hopefully, they'll be willing to provide email addresses, and we'll put out an action alert. We're going to want you to call your members of Congress, call your senators, ask them to sign on to these letters. We'll work with John Dichtel very closely because he's receiving, as is Rob, hundreds of emails from our office following up on our submissions, and he hopefully can forward them to you if you're members of his. We'll try to find you, and you follow up specifically with the staff in that regard. So that's how that'll work, and we can guide you.
So the more people that are reaching out to their own representatives, their own senators, the better chance there is to do this.
Even in this environment, I will say with the health centers and the TRIO program, that's in the most controversial appropriation bill. It sustained a 30% cut in the House. And so we were a little nervous for those 2 programs, and it was a win to get level funding. And they were among the only programs in that bill to get level funding, and it's because the voices were heard and members made sure to protect those programs in this environment.
So to a certain degree, it's using the moment, but it's a long game.
It's a long game.
Right. So let's take just 1 second. By show of hands, how many people in this room expect to receive some type of federal funding to support their work as it relates to the 250th? Okay. How many expect to receive state-level funding for the 250th work? And how many have a strategy that is primarily focused on corporate or private support? Okay, interesting. Very good. All right, so one more.
Just one more thing. To Rob's point, you guys have an opportunity to ask your senators for an earmark. You should be doing that. I'm happy to talk with any of you about that process. $3 million directly went to the Connecticut Museum as a result of those efforts, and it's something that you can cut through some of the bureaucracy by going right to Congress for that funding.
Very good. Thank you. Okay, let's move on now to talk more specifically about state funding. And I think 2 reasons this is so important. One, a vast majority in the room just demonstrated that there's interest or there's intent to have state funding to drive a lot of their work. And I think the reality is, and we heard earlier today from America 250, that's not going to be a source of funding for us, as we can tell right now, and as sort of self-proclaimed. So that's the long game, but what actually gets us to the moment of January 4th, 2026 in a meaningful way. So Cassandra, if you could please tell us what you would suggest is at the heart of your success in securing state funding for the 250th of Pennsylvania.
Sure. So thank you so much. Testing. There we go. So thank you so much for having me. And just, I think before I dive into that, I have to take a little step back of the history of America 250 PA and how we were created to fully understand the partnership with the Commonwealth. So America 250 PA was created in bipartisan legislation in 2018. So definitely, thinking ahead, the Commonwealth was in how to truly lay a really concrete foundation before 2026 was upon us. And I've actually had the honor of serving as the executive director from inception. So to see kind of everything coming full swing is just amazing to watch. But when we were created, the Commonwealth created us with no funding source. So they gave us a startup grant of $100,000 and told us that this was not going to be 100% publicly funded, and that we needed to go out and we needed to show them that there was private interest in the efforts. And so that was 2018, 2019. COVID hit in 2020. So we actually went back to the Commonwealth in 2021, having raised $1 million from private interests. And said to them, you asked us to show you that there was private interest here. We are. Here's the list. So to this point, as of today, America 250 PA is a true public-private partnership, having matched every dollar that the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania has provided us with public funding. With private funding. And, in multi-year commitments leading up to 2026, we actually have an additional $2 million in multi-year commitments from private companies and such. And so up until 2022, we were going caucus by caucus to the governor. Each caucus and the governor would give different amounts. It was that constant grind. I know all of you know it. And I was thrilled. The 23-24 budget, the governor and the legislature added America 250 PA to the state budget as our own itemized line, and funded us at $2.5 million this cycle. And then we're in the governor's budget for the 24-25 budget at 2.5 as well.
Great. So how about share how did you get to that point? What are some specific tips and tricks that we can all deploy to engage with the legislature in our state, to engage with the governor and the administration in our state?
Yeah, so I think the approach to this I took was a little different. So I'm actually a former borough mayor. I was actually the youngest serving mayor in the country, female mayor in the country, when I was elected at 20. So my approach to this was building this from the ground up and truly engaging the local grassroots, engaging communities, boroughs, cities, townships, villages, community organizations, and really making sure that, again, it wasn't us coming in from the state level and telling them what was most important for this anniversary, but learning from them, walking those main streets, going into those historic theaters. And from that, America 250 PA was thrilled in December to announce that we were the first state in the country that has all of our counties, 67, who have passed a 250th resolution becoming official partners. In addition to that, and I am a little biased, we have over 300 local municipalities who have also passed the 250th resolution. So with that, we look at that and think, how better to stay in the faces of your legislative members than with their constituents who are constantly talking about this, and the buzz on the ground from, again, these local community organizations, these municipalities, these counties has really helped us in building the momentum for 2026. And also, we've built over 12 programs and projects that have been launched in all 67 counties across our Commonwealth thus far, and engaging the legislative members in all of those programs when we're going to their districts, making sure they know, making sure they're there, making sure they're participating. The other thing we've found that was really successful, especially when we were going caucus to caucus, and I like to say shaking our tin cup, but we would produce legislative reports. We would constantly show them the impact, the numbers, the data points, which we, of course, collect on everything that we're doing to show them that every public dollar was being spent properly and showing the impact that we could have.
And how about with the executive branch of government in Pennsylvania? What has your connection been there, and how do you keep them informed and on your side?
Yeah. So America 250 PA, we had from the very beginning under the Wolf administration. I actually came from the Wolf administration when I took this role. We've had extreme engagement from the governor's office, both the last administration and this administration. One thing that we did very early on, as soon as we were created, was Governor Wolf and I sat down and we called all of the former living governors of the Commonwealth and asked them to co-chair this project. All of them have been actively engaged. And I think one thing that shows, especially as we travel the Commonwealth, both blue and red counties, it shows the bipartisanship. And it shows that these leaders that folks believe in and respect so highly, truly believe in the impact that this milestone anniversary can have on communities across the Commonwealth if it's actually done right. So we're thrilled. Again, Governor Shapiro in the Commonwealth is, one of our biggest cheerleaders on 2026 and the 250th.
That's great. Now, this grassroots approach of sort of covering the whole state in getting to those districts of the legislators to make sure that they're aware of what's happening in their champions, I would assume there's also probably another opportunity, which is seeking local engagement. What does that look like, and what would you say, what are your suggestions where some institutions may be able to seek very specific local monies for their work in their 250th?
Yeah, so we also have a nonprofit affiliate partnership where we have over 150 local nonprofits from across the Commonwealth who have partnered with us, rowing again in the same direction to ensure that, we are putting Pennsylvania first. And I think generally speaking, the other thing that the legislature did that was very, very helpful in engaging local communities was last legislative session, they created, through House Bill 1952, the America 250 PA Infrastructure and Improvements Projects Committee. This was made up of 24 bipartisan, bicameral members under the staffing of America 250 PA. The specific legislation tasked this committee to go out and hold 12 public hearings over a 15-week period, so we were on the road a lot, to actually ask everyday Pennsylvanians what they wanted to see, including some of these larger established organizations like all of you, as legacy projects that the Commonwealth could invest in. And we were proud that we had 168 submissions, hours and hours and hours of testimony that we then brought back to the Commonwealth. And we brought back to the legislature and the governor. We went through an additional round of collecting information. And now a final list of potential projects for the legislature and the governor to consider are on their desks.
Very good. That's something to keep in mind for all of our state partners out there. And you heard Virginia's governor talk a little about that the other night, that this is, I think, a model that we're starting to see where there's funding for operating the commemorative activities. There's also the potential of funding legacy projects or infrastructure improvements. And that's what we hope for here in Virginia, which is the $20 million to support the commission's work in this next 2-year budget, and an equal amount of $20 million or so that's going to support capital improvements at sites that will be actively involved. So that's wonderful. Thank you very much. So Todd, let's turn to you now and talk about this third leg of the stool with private corporate support, something you've been really good at in raising interest in Georgia. So in that realm, and in some cases, this may be very new for some of our museum partners, particularly state agencies in some cases. So what would you say are some of the most important factors in securing corporate support and building that relationship?
Well, before I answer that question, let me return the compliment. This guy's doing amazing work at your institution and what you're doing, so you know very well what I'm going to be talking about, and I think you should run for office again. You would get my vote, certainly. You know, there are some things we can talk about that are specific to this moment, and then there are just some general rules about fundraising that I think are applicable to this situation and any kind of situation. I'm blessed to live in a state similar to Virginia where we have over 20 Fortune 500 companies. The city of Atlanta is chock full of businesses and money, and it is a great place. It is happy hunting ground if you're doing private fundraising. Some of the things, and as I said, these are just general rules that you would apply to any kind of fundraising, but they're applicable in this situation too. First of all, you need to make sure that whatever it is you're going out to ask for matches what that company and its foundation are giving money to. Make sure that you align with that company. You need to do your research first. I've heard so many people say, I went to Coca-Cola and I've got this great idea. And I went in there and they didn't want to fund it. They said it was great, but they wouldn't fund it. It didn't fit. And I'm like, did you do the research? Did you look and see what do they give money to? And this happens time and time and time again. So first of all, make sure that you've aligned what you're doing and what you're asking for with the giving priorities of that particular company and its foundation.
And Todd, sorry to interrupt, but in my experience, most major corporations that have a giving function, they share those pretty broadly.
Absolutely,
right?
Yeah. You can find it online. I would say do your research. It's not really that hard. It's usually online. It's easy to find. And if you have any questions, you can call them and they will usually tell you. Secondly, I would say be prepared to demonstrate impact. be able to demonstrate how many people are you reaching, because they want to make sure that these dollars, because they have to account for them too at some level with their board, with the CEO, if you're talking about the community person, be able to demonstrate the impact out there. Some of these things sound pretty basic, but sometimes we forget that we need to be prepared to talk about that. And then the last thing that I would say, or the third thing that I would say that I think is really important here, is to build your relationships. I don't care how good your program is and how wonderful you think it is, if you don't have any relationship in any way with either the community person, the foundation person, or the CEO, which is the person I would recommend if you can get to and get to know through your board, do that. If you don't have any relationship there, it's going to make it really hard to be able to sell them on this. You've heard it before, people give to people, they absolutely do. I like to call it not fundraising, but it's friend raising, by which I mean don't focus on the money, focus on building your friendships. And if you make friends with the right people, the money will follow that. My father was a salesman, and he used to always say that people don't buy the product, they buy you. And there's a lot of truth to that. And that doesn't mean, he said, that if you've got a really bad product, just because they like you, they'll buy it. But he said, I guarantee you, if they don't like you, I don't care how good the product is, they're not going to buy you. They're not going to buy it. So make sure that whoever you're sending in is the best person on your team. They've got the right personality. They know how to connect to people. They can build those relationships. You should be doing this all the time anyway. And then the last thing that I would emphasize, again, this is just something that we should be doing all the time, but I think it's particularly critical right now because of the environment we're in. They're talking about this in the other room, and that is be careful not to politicize your organization or your institution. And the way that you do that is you know when to stop talking. There is a fine line between your opinion. Let's say if you're running a history institution, there's a fine line between your professional opinion about the history and then what people should do with that history, your personal opinion about what they should do with that. Our job is not to tell people what to do with the history. Our job is to make sure that they are listening when we are teaching them the history. The worst thing that can happen is for you to say, okay, here's what happened, here's the history to this point, therefore you must do this. Because what happens then is you lose maybe half your audience. They stop listening, you never get them back, and it may be the very people that need to hear what you're saying. So our Attorney General in Georgia, who is a Republican, told me one day, I think of the Georgia Historical Society as an honest broker when it comes to history. He said, by which I mean the left, the right, the middle, we're all listening to you because we know your only agenda is for us to know the history. You are not going to tell me what to do with that history. And I said, thank you, Mr. Attorney General, because that's exactly right. We're here to make sure the debate is an informed one, but not to usurp your role or to get out of our lane. So we need to know when to stop. There are other examples. We were talking about some outside. The other organizations that are suffering right now, and particularly the corporate world does not want to see you doing that. They're getting beat up enough as it is. I've actually even had, I won't identify who they are, I've had major corporations give us money for programming, and they've said, we don't want our logo on it. We don't want our name on it. It's important what you're doing, but we cannot be identified with that particular project or program right now. Not that it's necessarily political, but because it's all caught up in all this DE&I backlash right now. So be careful in what you say. Know when to stop talking. Gary Cooper one time said, and I love this quote, the good thing about silence is that you never have to take it back. So just know, ask yourself, is what I'm about to say and do, does it fit with our mission? Is this our mission for me to say this at this point? So that's something that I would say, those are 4 things right there that I think are just basic, essential, and it's hard sometimes because we've got a lot of these young people, they're very passionate, they want to get out there, they want to see what they do as activism, and I remind them that if people stop listening, how effective have you really become? If no one's listening to you except that crowd. I mean, I love what Jane Kaminsky said this morning about her son, and unfortunately there's too much of that, where there's that little group and we're going to hang with our little group. So we often have to pull them back, but every time I see somebody screw it up, I send them an article about it and I say, this is what I'm talking about. this is what I'm talking about. This is what I'm talking about. So make sure that that's a part of your institutional culture.
So Todd, let's, in regard to the 250th, and so say I have identified a corporation and I see their giving priorities and I think that it aligns very much with what my institution is intending to do for the 250th. So what's the runway on these things from your experience? How and when should we be reaching out and engaging with that corporation to seek 250th support?
Well, I would do it right away. Like we said, we're running out of time. And particularly, again, building those relationships, you need to be in there talking about this already. One of the things that I would encourage you to do is, so we're anticipating that we're probably going to raise this year and the next two somewhere between $6 and $7 million for US 250 programming. Maybe 8, depending on a project that if we can pull this off. And the way that we're doing this is we're not creating a lot of new projects to layer on top of what we're already doing. This is one of the things that totally freaked out my team is when we came in and started talking about all these additional things. They're like, let's not do that. Let's take the existing programming. We're already raising money for certain things. Let's just label what we're doing as being a 250 project, because if you think about it, everything that you do, we do all the time in terms of history, is a US 250 project because we're addressing those major themes. So we have an annual Georgia History Festival. It has a different theme every year. It reaches about 250,000 Georgia students, basically the entire 8th grade of the state. And there's a different theme. And so for the next 3 years, beginning this year and the next 2, the theme of that is going to be, and I always have to read this because it's a little long, Restoring Trust in American Institutions, History and the Foundations of American Democracy. So what we're going to be doing, restoring trust in American institutions, is using history. We're looking at 4 areas: the free press, courts and the rule of law, voting and the acceptance of the results of elections, and, the history shows that's what we do. And then the last one is the Constitution itself, loyalty to the document and not to a person. We're going to use the history to show this is how we've always done it. This is why we are free. This is the stamp that we as Americans have put on these pillars of democracy. Well, we're not going to be, we've got to come up with themes anyway for what we're doing. So we're not going to go out and build on top of something that we're already doing and asking for money. So I would say if you can find a way to do that, you're not having to create something entirely new. You can also find something special in your collection, an object or a document, and find a way of getting that document or object out of your archive or out of your museum. People like the idea of things sort of going on the road and getting out. We have one of only 12 original copies of the United States Constitution. It belonged to Abraham Baldwin. It has all of his handwritten notes on it. We thought it was worth about $3 million until that one sold 2 years ago for $43 million. So the minute I came in and said, hey, I got this idea, let's take it on the road, you can imagine what my staff, heads were exploding. The idea of taking a $43 million document on the road. But immediately I said, look, we can go to UPS. Think about it. This is what they do. They might be the corporate sponsor of all of this.
Headquartered in Atlanta, right?
That's right. They're headquartered in Atlanta. And we can take this on the road. Thank you. Good point. They're headquartered in Atlanta. The former chairman of the former CEO is on my board. He'll be my next chairman. So we already had an in there. I think we should at least take it to the state capitol and have it on display there. The Speaker of the House is excited about it. I mentioned it to him the other day. But here's an opportunity to show what you do, and it's something that sounds very fundable because it's something that's unusual. The idea of, for some reason we have this reputation where somehow we're hiding this stuff. We're keeping it locked away. We're going to bring it out now to the public and let them see it. So I think that's another way that you can also, I think, do this. And the other thing I would suggest too is, and we've talked about this, and you probably have heard this before, continue to emphasize the Revolutionary War as an idea, not as an event. Because when you go in and you start talking to some corporate person about the Revolutionary War, their eyes might start glazing over. It seems like some remote thing in the distant past that, as you heard earlier, we don't even really know much about our founding story. But if you can say this is about the principles, the idea of human freedom and how we've continued to push those boundaries, how we've extended as Abraham Lincoln said, extended the promise of the Declaration of Independence to more and more groups, then you're going to get their attention. That's a language that they can understand at that point. So I would say all three of those things, and you need to be going in and doing that ASAP because there's not a whole lot of time left. Remember that they have cycles. Just because you walk in doesn't mean you're going to get given money, because if they have a foundation, they've got to run it through that process, and it takes a little bit of time. It's not as long as with state and federal government, and we get some state funding too, even though we're entirely private. That's a lot longer process, and it can be very grueling, but it does take some time. You can't just walk in and expect to walk out with a check.
It'd be nice.
It'd be nice.
It'd be nice.
Doesn't always happen, though. A lot of times you might get a okay.
We're talking about matchmaking. We're talking about relationship building. We're talking about messaging. I mean, that's all three of these buckets in some way sort of come back to those core elements. And I think we all know that. We're in the business of doing those things. So why don't we pause now and take some questions from anyone who's here. We'd love to, if you have anything for any of our panelists, we can bring a mic to you. And also, to our panelists, if there's any other points that you wanted to make that didn't get conveyed so far.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I really didn't answer your initial question. And so what was happening out there in terms of potential federal funding? IMLS was allocating some of their existing funds toward 250 projects. That is happening, but not much else other than that. A number of the other agencies were not making the 250 a priority. And so it became really clear to me that nothing was really being done in terms of moving the needle in getting any kind of federal funding for the 250th. And the last point I just want to make, that through the Normandy Group, I've learned that in 1976, the federal government did allocate what would be equivalent to about $350 million in today's dollars. So the federal government so far has probably spent somewhere around 40 or 50 on the 250th, but it's a far cry short of what was done previously.
Very good. And actually, on that very point, Serena, are you still with us in the room? We do. Oh, there you are. Very good. So Serena is with us from the National Park Service, and she had flagged prior to this session that there's a grant program that NPS is working on. And I thought if you would like to just share very briefly a high level on that, I think it'd be useful to our crowd.
Sure. All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Serena Bellew. I'm a Deputy Associate Director in the National Park Service headquarters in Washington, D.C. I don't work with the parks. I work with the program side of the National Park Service, so I administer programs like the National Register of Historic Places, the Historic Rehabilitation Tax Credit Program, and several grant programs. One of the groups that I oversee is the American Battlefield Protection Program, which is four grant programs. Probably the one that you're most familiar with is the Land Acquisition Grant Program, the Battlefield Land Acquisition Grant Program. We also have the Preservation Planning Grants, which are open to any site of conflict across the country. I should say that 3 of the 4 you're only eligible to apply if you are a Civil War battlefield that is listed in the congressional report that created ABPP, or a Revolutionary War or War of 1812, which is in a subsequent report. So happy to talk to anybody offline. I don't want to take up too much time. We also have a semi-quincentennial grant program that is going right now, and also happy to answer any questions. I'll be here the rest of the week with everybody, and please do consider applying. Not everybody is eligible, but state and local governments, nonprofits. So yeah, happy to chat.
Any questions? Yes. If you want to share it, then I'll repeat it for you.
state treasurer said, all I need to do is open a bank account, but I don't.
The question was, do you have to be a 501c3 to raise funds? I think one way of answering that is you have to be a 501c3 for the person giving the funds to have any benefits from that. So otherwise, it's just a couple of pals. Is that a fair answer?
Yeah.
And there may be some other designations other than 501c3 specifically that allow you to be designated as a charity that's eligible to return benefits to the giver. But my advice would be yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're not.
No,
Go ahead.
you
I was just going to say but they're not going to give unless they're going to be able to have the tax advantage of that in some way. You know.
But also, Michelle, too, so like Pennsylvania, when agencies are raising, sorry, I know, sorry. When agencies are doing projects to raise funding, we have the Team Pennsylvania as a partner to all of the agencies that works as the 501, because I think there's something within state government, too, that might be a little gray of raising money into so just double check that.
You're going to have to fill out all kinds of paperwork at the beginning of this. You'll have to send all kinds of paperwork back to them. You'll have to go through a portal usually. I mean, there's a lot of process other than, well, here's a check. I'd like to try that. That would be pretty cool, though.
Yeah, you can have a 501c3 that is a fiscal agent, and a lot of people do that for causes.
So we do that. We have a fiscal management partner.
That was the only thing I was going to add. As a local government guy, it's a little bit vague, but I get this question occasionally. Local governments are, in effect, nonprofits. The IRS, again, is kind of vague when you ask them to certify this. Most accountants will handle it, nobody ever questions it. But I'm not an accountant, I'm not an attorney. So it's best for liability to have your own 501c3, but if you can find a fiscal agent, that's great. And most local governments will do that.
Anything else? Yes.
Cassandra, wondering about the buy-in that you've gotten from the county levels and from the municipalities. Does that come with a financial buy-in, or is that really a sort of emotional, historical buy-in that's being leveraged for benefit with?
Yeah, so the municipality buy-in is strictly a 250th resolution. That's benign. It doesn't send up red flags for solicitors. The county buy-in is case by case. So we've had the 67 counties who've passed the resolution. Some of those counties, depending upon what possible revolutionary history they have, do they want to be, what their level of engagement they would like to have. Some of those counties have appropriated funds to a local America 250, PA, Bucks County, Delaware County, etc. So I want to say probably 18 or 19 of our 67 counties have created local county commissions, and of those, probably only a handful have appropriated county funds.
Yes.
Have any of you had experience with crowdfunding or had any success with small donor funding efforts that made it worthwhile?
Yeah, we're getting sort of I'll just, for what it's worth, my own experience there is it's often a lot of work to raise and not a lot of money. And sometimes it's more about the awareness and the relationships than it is actually about the money you're going to get from doing that exercise. So if you're trying to drum up a lot of attention, sometimes I could see that sort of crowdsourcing, crowdfunding as a benefit. But boy, unless you have a really, really big cause and a lot of people at your disposal to communicate with, it might be a really tough go. Fair? Any other? Okay. In the back.
Since we're talking about federal funding, I'm just curious that without action by Congress, the National Park Service Every Kid Outdoors program will expire in August of 2026. If you're not familiar, this program allows all U.S. fourth graders and family members free access to over 2,000 federal lands, waters, so kids can discover wildlife resources, but most important, history. And I'm just wondering if there's any chance that your resolution will also address extending this program so at least get it to the full year in 2026.
Our initiative does include the National Park Service. Thank you for being here today too and explaining your grant programs. We are advocating for that. This particular letter does not address that issue, but it's certainly something we anticipate that this effort is the first of its kind, where we're really trying to rally 21,000 advocates hopefully out there to get involved in this process. We expect that this will go on each year and be embedded like it was for the health centers and the TRIO program. In the case of the health centers, it went from an $800 million program to a $6.5 billion program. For TRIO, a $300 million program to over $1 billion. That's this kind of effort take year in and year out. And so this is a component that can be discussed. It's outside of the appropriations process. It's really hard, as you know, for Congress to get anything done. So it's something that you'll want to meet with your members of Congress. A partner of ours participated in that program with his daughters. It's fantastic, and I think we could develop a strategy, but it's not included in what we're doing right now.
Very good. I'm looking at the clock. I'm aware that we're the last session of the day. We have a really special evening ahead, so I think we'll call it with that, and I thank all of our panelists for being here and for sharing. And wish you all the best. Good luck.